We'll get started. Maybe with just a couple of suggestions. If you happen to be muted, unless there's a lot of noise in your background, don't hesitate. Don't be hesitant about unmuting, because I'll have a couple questions that I'll ask at the various times, and the hardest thing sometimes is people want to immediately reply, and we have to say, "You're muted. You're muted." So if you want to unmute, you can do this as people come in. A few things about tonight's topic: finding God. One of the rare topics in my experience over the years as a congregant myself, growing up in synagogues, and having worked in a number of synagogues, the one topic that certainly conservative and Reform non-Orthodox rabbis seem to seldom talk about is God. We'll talk about Israel. We'll talk about the political situations that are occurring in the country, about issues like starvation and homelessness and all sorts of various issues. But God always sort of seems to take a back seat. And as Jews, when you go into a church, this might be one reason. When you go into a church, usually very quickly into the service, God is spoken of. God plays a major role. But in the synagogue, we sometimes step back. And even people who come to the synagogue regularly to pray, the question still lies in almost stillborn on our lips, and that is, where is God? Who is God? What is God? What is my relationship to God? Ultimately, it's that relationship that really should be the driving force to bring us there. Before I begin with what I want to talk about, well, I'll begin with it. One of the questions I usually ask at this point in a discussion like this is how do you know that there is a God in this world? And I'll start with that question. And again, I say, if you want to take a moment to think about it, or if you want to reply, how do we know? How do you know that there is a God in this world? It's a tough question. Maybe as we go on this evening, you'll have some time to give some thought to this.
Yeah, it depends on what your definition is of God. Do you mean the anthropomorphic God?
No, I'm talking in very simple terms. I don't know anything about anthropomorphisms. All I'm talking about is a simple question, but hold your answer for just a moment.
Okay.
Let me first of all begin with a preface as people are coming in to our discussion tonight. First of all, I'm going to be very open and honest with you tonight. Okay, so I'm going to say things that you're going to maybe be, but I want to open my heart to you. I want you to know, maybe through my experience, maybe my experience mirrors yours. When I was in seventh grade, after my bar mitzvah, I mean, at that point, I mean, my rabbi played a major role in my life. And my bar mitzvah was a great moment in my life. But I don't think I ever thought about God per se. I thought about prayers that I had to say, and the order they had to be said in, and the people pat me on my back for doing a good job and shake my hand on the day of my bar mitzvah. But that summer after my bar mitzvah, my mother made the decision to send me to a Jewish summer camp Camp Solomon Schechter, that was located at the time on Whidbey Island in the Puget Sound area of Seattle. And I went there kicking because I said, you know, who wants to go to a camp and pray all day? My concept of a Jewish summer camp was when we were going to do prayers and things, and that's not what I want. I went there and I met some people that changed my life. And even the place, this was my Walden's Pond, as it were. It's a place that since that moment, I've gone back to on an annual basis by myself, located on the ocean in a beautiful setting. There is where I discovered God. That was where I had what I like to call, and we'll talk, my Sinai moment. And for me, personally, I'm going to be speaking this evening about the philosopher the philosopher who had the greatest impact on my belief and my understanding of God. And we'll share that with you. But I want to start by telling you, by introducing you perhaps to someone you've heard of, or maybe didn't know, Soren Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard was a Christian pastor and scholar who was really the father of what we would call religious existentialism. And Kierkegaard taught, and in fact invented, the term leap of faith. Kierkegaard was not one who believed in a supernatural God. And then maybe there are some who believe in this, and we'll come back to this in just a moment. Kierkegaard believed had a very different notion of God, but he said you can prove he was a rational thinker, a reasonable thinker. Reason and rationale played a very important part in his life and in his philosophy. But first of all, he said, before you can even begin to talk in those religious terms, you have to take the leap of faith. Because the question everybody wants to know is, prove to me there's a God. And he's saying, first you have to take that leap. First you have to say, okay, I'm willing to suspend my need to ask the question how do I know there's a God, to say there is a God. That's a given. Now let's talk about religion. And in a real sense, that's where our discussion begins here tonight. For me, that moment came, that leap of faith came at the age of 13. It wasn't, I don't want to pretend to be a sophisticated thinker at that age, or thinking I was just a kid. And like a lot of kids, maybe like you when you were growing up, I thought of God as this old man sitting on a rock with a book in his hand and a long white beard.
That's anthropomorphic.
That's right.
Okay.
We all had that notion of God. That was the notion that we read in Bible stories. As you grew, when you were 5 and 6, maybe 7, and you were going to Sunday school, and they were reading you these Bible stories about God and Abraham, and God visited Abraham, and God visited Isaac, and God came and met Abraham at, all of these things we hear. And we have this picture. We naturally, being human, we want to know, what does this look like? So we have this picture. And in some books, there's even pictures to go along with it back in the old days. But today, the problem for most adults today is they never have gotten beyond that 6- and 7-year-old notion of God. And when we talk about theology, we're talking about as adults, we're talking about something a little more sophisticated. And if you don't have that discussion, if you don't start talking, as we're going to do tonight, and understanding how God works in this world, then in fact, when you grow up, you look back at these Bible stories and you say, boy, what a bunch of nonsense that was. but I'm going to join a synagogue anyway, because I'm not joining a synagogue to find God. I just want to be with other Jews. And that's nice, except there is a strong notion that the synagogue is God-centered. And one of the questions we should be asking when we walk into a synagogue, or before we walk in, or when we join, is what do I want to embrace? How can I find fulfillment, my godly spiritual fulfillment in this particular place? Okay, having said this, given you all this, let me now introduce you to a very interesting person who had a tremendous effect on my life as an adult. When I began rabbinical school in 1972, I started rabbinical school because I kind of liked Jewish stuff. I had a great experience, as I said, at this summer camp. I had a great experience with USY, that at the time was pretty young. I had a great experience with Jewish friends I had who to this day are people I went to camp with way back then. And I thought that would be kind of this is what I want to do. And I like teaching, and I can teach. I was a high school teacher at the time in public schools. And I said, you know what? I can take my learning and put it in a Jewish context. But I don't know how much I really was thinking about God. And that's when I discovered, through my studies and such, a God-centered sort of understanding of Judaism. And one of my teachers who had a profound effect on me was a philosopher, a teacher of philosophy, David Hartman. Now, you might recall the name David Hartman because the Hartman Institute was named after his father. He started it, but named it after his late father. And David himself sadly passed away several years ago. And I had the chance to study with him actually when he had just made Aliyah, just had moved to Israel. And his thing was Maimonides and that period. But he introduced me to Martin Buber and to Franz Rosenzweig. And I want to take a moment to introduce you to these people, because their struggle with trying to understand God really fed mine. So I'm going to begin, first of all, with Franz Rosenzweig. Let's see here. For those who don't know, Rosenzweig, a nice Jewish boy, was born in Germany in 1886. And he died at the age of 43, so he was very young when he died. He was described as a very inauspicious Jewish background. He was an only child of a very well-to-do German Jewish family that had very little interest in Judaism. And we know that the German Jews, even leading up to the Holocaust, were not the most religious of Jews. First of all, one of the main significant movements in Germany was the Reform movement, where it was founded, actually. And the German Jews were not anywhere near the religious nature of for instance, the Polish Jews, who suffered tremendously, of course, in the Holocaust. Much of his philosophy grew out of his experience just before World War I. Now, he was a young university student. And this is when lives change. You know, people, even with regard to, and this is a completely different topic. And so I'm going to say something, but I'm not going to get lost in this. The biggest decision I think a parent makes, one of the most important decisions a parent makes with their child, is what college or university they will go to. If you decide that you want to send your youngster to Podunk U in Ames, Iowa, or something like that, you know, this is the most impressionable age for young people. This is when they start thinking ideas, when they start finding independence, when they start growing intellectually as an adult. And it's an exciting time. That's why the protest movements going back to the beginning of time were always started on college campuses and by young people who grasp the excitement of youth and the excitement of seeking change. It's also a time when people make important decisions like marital decisions. I mean, sometimes they fall in love. It's a time of a lot of change. So I say this as an advertisement, by the way. If you want to, you're here in New Jersey, you're blessed with universities that are located not just within an earshot of a Jewish community, in a Jewish community. There's, for instance, the Upper West Side of New York. There's probably no more vibrant young Jewish community in the world, young student Jewish community, than the Upper West Side of New York, and subsequently other communities in the Northeast. But also what comes with this, with being a young person, as I say, is that activist sort of concept. And he was a young activist, Rosenzweig. And in Germany, as we noted, there was a lot of assimilation. In fact, Germany was a very assimilated country in the following World War I and even before World War I. And so for Rosenzweig, fell into a group that had a number of Christian friends, and they were all philosophy students. And in fact, his friends who he met during these years felt that one could find living. They felt that one could find true living religiosity only in Christianity. And after much thought and arguments and discussions, Rosenzweig decided that's where I should be. And so he was getting ready to depart from Judaism. And he said, well, I'm going to make one last visit to the synagogue on Yom Kippur. He never really talks about what happened on that day. But as a result of the experience he had on that one single day, he not only stayed within the Jewish community, as it were, he devoted his life to trying to discover and understand God and community. Not to mention, he and Martin Buber together started what was called a Lehrhaus, an adult education center for Jewish learning. He felt that adult education was extremely important in terms of bringing people back into Judaism. Okay, this is some background. After the war, he left his theologizing, as I said, and spent his entire time in adult Jewish learning. But he teaches us an awful lot about what he found on that day in Yom Kippur and his notion of God. He taught us that there are three givens of existence, he said. There is death, which makes us aware of the self. With the existence of death, that means that we internally become more into ourself and more understanding of ourself and our existence. He argued that the existence of the world and self are different. Each can exist separately. The world, by the world, we can mean the community and the self. One doesn't have to be connected with the other. At this point, we live independently. Neither are creations of reason or will, but of another presence, God. So for him, there were three existences that existed. We, the world, or me, the world, and God. Our reason cannot hope to explain them in terms of some master abstract principle. We can never hope to understand in a real sense the whole existence of God in terms of reason. But these three relationships of existence are all the result of a Sinai moment. Now, what do I mean by that? According to our tradition, and this is what separates the Reformed, the Orthodox, and the Conservative, according to our tradition, the last week, in fact, in the Torah, we read about the receiving of the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, and that Sinai moment is what transformed us in biblical terms from a group of slaves into a people. And according to Orthodox thought, that moment occurred once and only once. Everything was revealed. God revealed to Moses everything from the Torah to everything that would be revealed centuries later. And so for the Orthodox thinker, there was one moment that we're all a part of, that God legislated, that we were, in fact, they like to say that we were all there to see this happen. And that God legislated, and when the ancient rabbis started creating the Talmud centuries and centuries later, these ideas were already given on Sinai. They've just been discovered. But nothing's new under the sun. The conservative movement took a very different position. It said that Sinai occurred, but in a sense, we then took it, and with each generation, we took the legislation of that moment, and we found a place for ourselves. We continued to interpret it, to learn from it. God didn't give everything. God gave us the moment, and we took from that moment and created what we know as Judaism. And for the Reform movement, it's the Sinai moment. Sinai occurred, but God, we're not. There was a sense that we weren't obligated to at that point to anything. We were given the opportunity to choose what we wish from this. Rosenzweig went one step further. He said that, in a sense, that unlike traditional Judaism, Rosenzweig did not believe in a God who communicated with verbal statements. He says all God gives in Revelation is self. God gives him or herself in Revelation. God's being there with us. What he taught us is that each of us individually has our Sinai moment. That moment that the aha moment that suddenly our lives changed in some respect. Now, we can sit here and talk about that, but I would imagine if I were to ask each of you, if you can recall a moment that changed your life, that brought you into, so to speak, the Jewish fold, or for that matter, that moment you discovered an attachment to God in your life. Knowing for Rosenzweig, God didn't give us verbal commands or anything like this. God gave us just his or her presence. So this is now for me, I found a great deal of warmth in this sort of thing. Now, each individual, according to Rosenzweig's understanding, has his or her own revelation moment or Sinai moment. The messianic dream, the coming of the Messiah, is achieved when these three relationships of we, the world, and God all come together. And that will only happen when we can reach out and bring other people, not to believe as we do, but to bring them to the values of and the ethics and the morals that are taught by our tradition. Now, I'm going to pause right here. For Rosenzweig, by the way, before I pause, our relationship not performance, is the test of Jewish legitimacy. Relationship, not performance. So he therefore was more concerned with piety and observance than the liberals, with autonomy more than the Orthodox, and with religion more than the Zionists. Okay, let me get that again. So the relationship, your relationship was God with God. He was more concerned with just the piety and observance than the liberals. What does that mean? For him, he thought the Jewish law, and the term halacha, as we say, halacha were guideposts that help us understand God. They bring us closer to God. They, by practicing some of these rituals, they're just ways to bring us closer to our personal understanding and our personal moment that we had with God, and keep us there, as it were. And so, for instance, though, where he differs from the Orthodox or the liberals, for that matter, is, well, he says, yes, we should be practicing Jewish observance. We should be keeping kosher. You should be davening each day. You should be doing all of these things. But you're not because they're just guideposts. They'll help you along the way. It's like a discipline. Everybody wants to lose some weight. Well, one way you lose weight is by exercising, but you've got to be willing to submit yourself to the exercises. Some of them are harder than others, and you've got to stick with it and discipline yourself on that road. But a lot of people say, no, I don't want to do that. And to that, what Rosenzweig would say is, that's fine, that's cool. But don't say no, say not yet. And so, for instance, when somebody may ask, are you keeping kosher? You may say, no. Don't say no, excuse me, not yet. I'm not at that point in my growth where I've gotten to but by saying no, you're cutting yourself off. You're saying, I'm not a part of this community. But the community itself is a community that welcomes, his community welcomes people from every walk of Jewish life. All people who are interested in finding themselves and finding God in their lives, and have had an inspiring moment and what do I do next? And this is one of the strengths, I think, in his teaching. It is not for him, and this is why he speaks so loudly today, even after these many years after he's died. He's become even more important among young people and even some of us oldsters, because he doesn't talk in terms of collective. He's not talking in terms of the community. He's talking in terms of the self, which is exactly why, when we ask, why aren't people flooding our synagogues anymore? Why are synagogues closing? Because synagogues were established for the collective. If you wanted to be Jewish, you've joined a synagogue. When you move to at one point in our history here in America, you moved to a community, the first thing you asked if you were a Jew is, where is the synagogue? Because that told you where the community was living. And we joined. He's saying, no, more important than the collective is the self. More important than the we is the me. Now that might sound selfish, probably is. But that's where we are today. That's why Judaism is not in trouble, as it were, in America. Synagogues are, because what they have discovered is that the youth, the generations behind me, the Gen X's and the millennials, they're no less Jewish and they don't feel any less commitment. They just want Judaism on their own terms. And we're more in what can you give me? How can I find fulfillment? This is where Rosenzweig was in the early 20th century, and Martin Buber, by the way, whom I'm going to whom I will spend a few moments on here a little bit later in this discussion. But I'm going to pause right now because before I pause, one last, and I'll be brief because I want to open this up to you and ask if you have questions or if you'd like to share your thoughts. For me, in my growth, I found I didn't come upon Rosenzweig didn't have as big a role in my life in the early years of my rabbinate as I have found in these later years. He was there. I was always very much in line with him, but it's been in maybe it's I think after you're 40 or 50 maybe, or 60 or 70, you start thinking about your mortality. You start thinking in terms that this isn't going to last forever. And you start thinking in godly terms. And what gets me up in each morning is this notion of feeling like I have God in my life, that God is there, not verbally, not through verbal commands and such, but the God is a part of my life and has been a part of us from the very beginning. And for me individually, it guides me. So no longer do I have the guilt I may have had in my early years that I wasn't doing all the halacha, all the Jewish rituals or laws, that I wasn't obeying all of them. And some will say, well, that's all right, but you have to be willing to admit that you are over, that you are transgressing this or that. I don't feel that way any longer. I feel that what I'm doing, what brings me closer to God. Now, on a communal level, of course, my life is lived my life in the synagogue is lived in a different way, perhaps, than my life outside the synagogue, because I'm working with people who are still trying to find that path. And I don't want to close off any paths for people. I don't want to, I'm not here to say that because you're doing this, you're not right, or you're doing that, you're not right. No. And Rosenzweig wouldn't say the same thing. Rosenzweig would say, that's right for you. And that's right for you. Okay, let me pause now. And if anybody has any questions or they like to comment for a moment, let's just unmute yourself if you're not already unmuted and speak away. Yes, the Leibowitzes. I think you have to unmute. If you can't, maybe I can do it for you. Hold on here. I can probably do it for you here. Let me, no, maybe I can't. No. Okay. There should be a mute button on the bottom left of your screen. It says audio. You see the audio button? In the meantime, while they're looking for it, anyone else would like to?
By the way, the mute button, Shirley, in your square, at least in the top right-hand corner,
Yeah.
there's a mute button.
Oh, maybe it's in the top right.
Yeah, it's in the square, top right-hand corner. If you put the hand up, I think you're getting there.
Close. We got everybody in here.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to say something.
Yes.
In college, I had a sociology professor, Higgins, and he was a Roman Catholic with 8, 9 kids. And he looked at it from a sociological point of view that people personally and people in groups as a group have questions. Why are we here? How did we get here? And that's how I look at it. That each group, you had your pagans, your Canaanites, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and each was part, and I think this is Buber, each was part of a particular looking for a universal and trying to answer universal questions. And, there's supernatural, there's scientific.
Yeah.
And the way I look at it is you're born into a group. And if you can find something meaningful in that group and work through that community and its ideas, and you're not hurting anyone and you're becoming a better person, that's fine. And no matter what the deity, the divine, the definition is, maybe 1,000 years from now, science is going to discover how the world, started. What were the forces? Maybe we'll never know.
No,
So,
I think, yeah, there's a lot, the whole, I guess, we can drive ourselves crazy with, with talking about, all of these notions, but ultimately there's a sense of fulfillment, and it's hard for me to explain if you haven't really, if you haven't been there, but there are moments when we find a great deal of serenity in our lives. The synagogue, in a sense, can be and should be a place of serenity, a place, I've said this before, of kindness, of warmth, but it's a place where in an ideal world, we're all coming to seek God in our lives. And the strength for me of the strength of the non-Orthodox movements, be they reform or conservative, the strength are that we're not judging anybody on what they're doing. We're judging, we're celebrating the fact that they are there doing. We're not judging somebody because they are more righteous or more ritual doer. They're more of the ritual doer. We're celebrating the fact that we each have found and are discovering God in our lives and celebrating that moment in our own way. And if we can understand this, then we can also understand people better, because we're all made in B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, right? So each of us is really an expression of God's presence in this world. And if we could learn to talk to each other and confront each other in this manner, as if we're speaking to God, which we are in a sense, then we come to understand ourselves. We come to appreciate our very beings. We always, the fact is that people go where they feel comfortable. One of the this is and in seeking God, you have to feel comfortable about the place that you are and where you are. We can see this, I mean, even in our own synagogue, with the effort to bring two synagogues together that ritually are very different. And in the discussions of trying to come together, we don't bring God into the discussion. We just bring ritual in. We talk about, well, this person doesn't want to see somebody else standing, that somebody doesn't want to see a woman standing up at the Torah, or this wants this one. And we lose sight of the whole, what we're trying to experience here. And that is our present, being in God's presence. Now, I like to always say, I love to hear myself say this, because this is the line that I learned from Yentl. Remember the movie? And I don't know that Singer had this in his short story, but in the movie, Yentl goes, Barbara Streisand, for those who haven't seen it. Yentl goes to her father, who is a rabbi and a teacher, and who has studied Talmud with her. And God forbid a woman would study Talmud, you know, in the very Orthodox communities, even to this day. Your day schools, your very, very religious day schools. Maybe even though I think the girls' yeshiva that's in our own building, I mean, there are certain things they're not going to teach. The girls aren't going to study Talmud. You know, so in Yentl, her father's, she says, Abba, it's time to study. And you know the scene where he first goes and closes the windows, pulls down the shades. And she says, what are you doing? God doesn't care if a woman learns. He says, well, I'm not so certain about, I know God doesn't, but I'm not so certain about the neighbors. And ultimately, when we have these discussions, we've completely limited the presence of God from those discussions. And that's what makes them so trying. If we could learn to respect one another for their way of approaching God, their way of finding God, then we would be much more understanding of each other. And at the same time, I mean, maybe you don't like this, and maybe I'm uncomfortable with that, but you know what? Maybe we can learn to come together on these things. So this is why I find people, this is what drove Rosenzweig, by the way, away from the community, because he felt there was no place for him in his community. And today, I think we are a little more, that's what, and I believe also that's what these were the seeds that created the reform movement in the 17th, 18th century, and the conservative movement in the 20th century, was this feeling that we weren't finding within the Orthodox settings what the fulfillment that we're looking for in our understanding of God. Anyone else?
I found a way to unmute myself.
Yes!
Thanks,
There is a God in this world.
I was sort of thinking that either God or Evan wanted me muted, but I'm back.
Okay.
So I just want to say, Rabbi, I am very, very grateful for this conversation, because this is something that I had been thinking about for a long time. I was raised in a home with two Holocaust survivors, okay? Auschwitz was the one, and the other one, hidden child. And God was such a big part of this house. It was communicated from the youngest age that God was loving and powerful and with us, and just so from the youngest age, I had, even before I learned all the rules and all the holidays, there was a sense already that was very powerful, and it was something that everyone loved. Everyone's very comforted by this sense of God. And I remember, so I've been in the synagogue for a really long time, from B'nai Israel to Jewish Center, blah, 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 blah. But I've been in every one of these things. Then they all came together, okay? But when I was a little girl, I felt like there was a sense of awe in the synagogue. And that it wasn't that you were necessarily coming to the synagogue to find God. I think all of these people had God in their heart very strongly, and that the synagogue was a place to come to express it in the collective, that all of these people were. Mm-hmm. Through the years, as I became an adult, and I don't know if this has to do with I'm not well versed in this. I don't know if it has to do with the evolution of the teaching of the conservative movement. There seemed to be a much bigger emphasis on intellectualizing Judaism, and sort of, and even mentioning God, because I remember going to things even at Jewish Center years ago and talking about God, and people were like, I'm just talking, kind of feel like we're talking about God, like I almost feel like I'm being stupid. Like, like people, it seemed much more intellectual and a lot less God. And to me, without God, synagogue is just a club with rules. It's God is the whole reason for this. And it's not because there's this man in the sky, it's because this is how we elevate our own neshama. This is how we elevate our soul to find meaning in life, to elevate ourselves so that this experience was about something, something holy. So I don't know, maybe if you could explain, did you observe this as well, this sort of over intellectualization of Judaism and the conservative movement, such that it became kind of like a club of like doing good deeds rather than almost like a political movement or of sorts,
Well,
coming from foreign parents? I
yeah,
didn't really.
it was more than just a club of doing good deeds. I wish that the good deeds again, when I started at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I started in 72, which was the same year that Abraham Joshua Heschel died. And with Heschel died the spiritual presence of God in the Jewish Theological Seminary.
Mm.
There were two parties there. There were the halakhists, the Talmudists, the scholars who were almost entirely European. Most of the faculty was. And there was Heschel. And the two did not mix. In fact, Shaul Lieberman, who was probably the greatest Talmudist of the 20th century, and an Orthodox Jew for all intent and purposes, but for him, the Heschel was just a lot of puff and smoke. It had no substance. And it became, and in fact, under the late Chancellor Gershon Cohen, who had just started the year or a couple of years before I started the seminary, Cohen taught that he was there to teach the dispassionate study of Judaism. And so during my years, the seminary was considered by rabbinical students as a spiritual desert. We studied Talmud, we studied all this, but there was with the death of Heschel, the spiritual presence, the teacher of spirituality was gone. Now, since then, the seminary has changed directions. There's the European influence of those many years, which was positive in a real sense, in an intellectual sense. But you're right, the conservative movement was founded on as an intellectual response to the Orthodox. We believed in what we called historical Judaism. You needed to, or and more importantly, there was a German term, and we were and the conservative movement grew out from ideas out of the German university, the Wissenschaft des Judentum, which means with a scientific study of Judaism. And so our rabbis were really steeped in this. The next session we're going to have is going to be about Mordecai Kaplan. Mordecai Kaplan lived during that time, and during those same years, his notion of God is something completely different, but it's a product of, in a sense, in a way, of what the seminary was about, and there were rabbis from that era all the way through rabbis who were ordained all the way through the 60s who carried Kaplan really under their arm. We'll talk more about Mordecai Kaplan next time, but yes, there was felt a spiritual absence, and that it found its way into our synagogues. And our synagogues became, of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, they were beautiful architectural buildings that, again, that left you wanting in terms of spirituality. They looked beautiful. They encompassed Torah. They were, but yet Torah sort of laid, as Heschel liked to say, laid stillborn on the lips of the daveners. This is there's a spiritual sort of a presence that we're fighting with it today too, in a real sense. We're fighting the people are hungry to find meaning to their lives. They're hungry to find at the end of the day, Who am I? What am I? What difference does it make? What difference could I possibly make in this world? I'm just a cog in the works. We're all looking for some semblance of meaning. And that's where the synagogue today can be a place. The word Torah can be a place that tells you, shows you over the centuries of how people came to find God in their lives. I'll give you one example here. And this tells you something about the development of God historically. If you read the Bible and if you follow the Torah, the God of Genesis, and I've said this before, the God of Genesis is very different from the God of Exodus, the book of Exodus. The God of Genesis is a personal God who had the personal relationships with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, with their kids. The book of Exodus, we speak of God now as having a relationship with Moses and with Aaron, but for the most part, it's the God of the big picture. The people themselves have really no semblance of a relationship with the God. They only come to God through Moses. By the way, this is why there's an interesting section in our Haggadah. How do Christians come to God? Through Jesus. And there was a great fear by the ancient rabbis about in the first centuries, the Common Era, especially with the growth of Christianity, that Christians are looking at Jews and saying, "What are you talking about? You come to God through Moses." And so there's a line in our Haggadah that says, "Not by an angel, not by a messenger, but we were taken out of Egypt by the God, Holy One, the God." Which is an effort to just, but the sense is that the God of the book of Exodus was different. Just as we go through the Bible and through history, we see that people's relationships with God change. Today, our relationship with God is, as you can see with Rosenzweig, is personal. We want to. I mean, I shouldn't say we. I want a personal relationship with God. I'm not interested in just the God of the big picture, who I'm just another person in the crowd. I want to know that God's in my life and a part of me, and is helping me move forward, is helping me through those moments when I'm in despair. That I want to feel that I don't have to walk through life alone. That God will be there with me. Just like the words of the psalmist. Did God change? No. In every era, historically, we changed in our understanding of God. And that's why I believe that's why God is alive and well. We have a need to know that there's something to guide us through these moments. Yes, we have husbands and wives and children, but you know what? As you get older, especially as you get older, a lot of this disappears. But God doesn't. God's there in those moments of loneliness, in those moments of crisis. And by the way, if you don't believe it, when things really start going badly, especially when people get ill and things of this sort, one of the first places people look is for God. I'll share one story here, and then we'll bring this to a close. As part of my journey as a rabbi, I've done 1,000 different things. I mean, I've done everything you can do as a rabbi, and I spent a year of my life working as a hospice chaplain. I was on a team, a home care team, and I was part of I was a spiritual coordinator. And during that year, I spent time working with not just Jewish patients, because they weren't all Jewish. I also was responsible for the Christian patients. And if they didn't, I'd say, I'll arrange for a priest or a minister for you. But in many cases, they said, no, we just want you. And I saw working with patients who, when they began the journey, their final journey in hospice, usually 6 months or so out from when the death occurs. When they begin, they and their family's most important concern was the medical, the doctor. I want to see the doctor. I want to see the nurse. Oh, Rabbi, it's nice to have you here. Thank you. Yes, let's talk a little, but I want to see the doctor, the nurse. As the end became more imminent, they were less interested in the doctor and the nurse. They were more interested in the transcendent. They were more interested in speaking with the rabbi or the priest or the minister. Suddenly, there was a strong interest, not just for the patient, but the family as well, to understand and to come to terms with God. And where God was a part of their lives, and more times than not, that was the Christian family. There was one man in particular, a devout Catholic, who was prepared for death. He was prepared for it, and he felt totally comfortable with his understanding God was in his life. Jews spend so little time talking about God and their role with God and their closeness to God that Jews get very frightened in those last moments. What's going to happen? Where am I going to go? What's good? Because we haven't taken the time to develop that relationship. The fear overcomes really the reality. I want to, we've talked here and really, my notion of God is as I've tried to express in many ways, I found God in my Walden's moment at Camp Solomon Schechter so many years ago, and I've been searching to understand God better over these many, many years. And that's what keeps me going during moments of down moments, and especially high moments. I encourage you to follow along. We're going to have some more discussions, and maybe I'll develop, in fact, a little syllabus I can send you with books, a list of some interesting, because the best way to understand how you see God is by seeing how others came to this, how others took this journey. I'm going to begin by just telling you giving you name of one book. It's the title of this series. It's called Finding God, and the author, there are two Reform rabbis, and Finding God, and Daniel Heim, I think, is Danny Heim.
No. It's Danny Syme.
Syme,
and it's
Syme.
and it's Sonsino. I think his name is
Yes, Efrat.
yeah. I personally knew Danny Syme. I spent time
He's a
alone with
wonderful
him.
guy.
Yeah, he is. He's dynamic.
And I would recommend. I highly recommend this as
it's very hard to. Well, you're gonna have to get it on Amazon.
Oh, is it still still being published?
Yes. You get it in Amazon.
Yeah, and if not, I can send. But this is a direction. And again, watch for the next date. I don't have it right now in front of me. The next date when we'll meet, which will in which we're going to look at Mordecai Kaplan, you're going to find that Mordecai Kaplan's understanding of God is probably very much in line with many of yours. Okay. Yes, Rona.
Just a quick question. You mentioned Martin Buber earlier, and I had taken a class when I was 16 years old in the GTS about Jewish philosophy, and it was so all in my head. But I remember that they talked about the book I Am Now, or the Son of I Am Now. Will you be able to address that all in this conversation, or will you discuss it later?
Yes, I'll put that down. I was going to discuss this evening, but I got so carried away that I didn't get to. But that's very important because Buber and Rosenzweig actually worked together. Buber then he moved to Palestine and left Germany and went to Palestine and taught. He taught at the Hebrew University and subsequently died in 1965. But he left a tremendous impact. His greatest impact, interestingly, was even more so on the non-Jewish community, the Christian community. And we'll see. You'll see why when we talk. So we'll do Kaplan, and we'll start with a little bit of Buber, because I think he's very interesting. And we'll go on and discuss Mordecai Kaplan. Anybody else will have any questions or something you want to say before we conclude our evening here? Okay, well, thank you for putting up with me.
Thank you, Rabbi. This was really, really interesting.
And I want to encourage you to come to shul, and we're going to do some more talking about trying to bring God into our lives. And there's several ways, and I think find the fulfillment that's there. Okay, so I want to wish you all a good evening, and stay well, stay warm, and until we meet again. Happy trails.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.